evening, ladies and emperors. I just got back from Venice, and boy, are my arms tired.
Picture this. You're one of the greatest comedy directors who ever lived. You've made people laugh for over 60 years. You've created movie magic with films like Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, and Spaceballs. But here's the thing about being a legend like Mel Brooks. You remember everything. And I mean everything. Including the actors who drove you absolutely crazy. Today, we're diving deep into a story that Hollywood doesn't want you to hear. At 98 years old, Mel Brooks has finally opened up about something he's kept quiet for decades. The actors he couldn't stand working with. The performers who broke his trust. The stars who made his life miserable on set. And trust me, some of these names will shock you. Mel Brooks isn't just any director. He's a master of comedy who built an empire on one simple rule. Everything has to work together like a perfectly oiled machine. Every actor, every joke, every moment has to fit perfectly. And when someone throws off that balance? Well, let's just say Brooks has a very long memory. Now, before we jump into this list, you have to understand something about Mel Brooks. This man has worked with hundreds of actors over his career. He's launched careers, created comedy legends, and brought joy to millions of people around the world. But he's also incredibly particular about who he works with. In his world, talent isn't enough. You need to be willing to serve the comedy, not your own ego. So let's start with our first actor, and this one might surprise you because it involves one of Broadway's biggest names. Frank Langella is a serious actor. The kind of performer who brings Shakespeare to life on stage. He's got that deep, commanding voice and the kind of presence that fills up a theater. So when Mel Brooks was casting for his movie Dracula Dead and loving it, Langella seemed like the perfect choice. After all, he had already played Dracula on Broadway to great success. What could go wrong? Well, everything, as it turns out. You see, Mel Brooks had a very specific vision for this movie. He wanted to take the classic Dracula story and turn it into a comedy goldmine. Every scene was supposed to be packed with jokes, silly moments, and the kind of humor that makes you laugh until your sides hurt. But Frank Langella? He approached the role like he was still on Broadway performing serious theater. During the first script reading, something happened that made Brooks realize he had made a huge mistake. Langella started questioning the jokes in the script. He wanted to know why they were making fun of the classic Dracula story. He seemed uncomfortable with the silly, over-the-top comedy that Brooks was famous for. Instead of embracing the humor, Langella was fighting against it. Brooks watched this happening and felt his heart sink. Here was an incredibly talented actor who just didn't understand what they were trying to create together. Langella was stuck in serious theater mode, while Brooks needed someone who could dive headfirst into pure silliness. The breaking point came when Langella questioned whether they should really be mocking such a classic character. That's when Brooks knew it wasn't going to work. Comedy requires complete commitment. You can't hold back or worry about looking silly. You have to believe in every ridiculous moment, no matter how absurd it seems. So Brooks made the tough decision to replace Langella with Leslie Nielsen. And what a difference that made. Nielsen understood exactly what Brooks wanted. He threw himself into every joke with complete enthusiasm. He wasn't worried about his dignity or his reputation. He just wanted to make people laugh. The movie became much funnier because Nielsen was willing to look completely ridiculous for the sake of comedy. Frank Langella never spoke publicly about being replaced, and Brooks rarely mentioned the situation. But it taught Brooks an important lesson about casting. Raw talent isn't enough. You need actors who understand and embrace your comedic vision, not fight against it. Our second actor is going to break your heart because this story involves one of Mel Brooks' closest friends and creative partners. Gene Wilder wasn't just an actor in Mel Brooks movies. He was Brooks' comedic soulmate. Together, they created some of the funniest movies ever made. The Producers, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. These weren't just movies, they were comedy masterpieces that changed how people thought about humor in films. Brooks and Wilder had this incredible creative connection. They could finish each other's jokes. They understood each other's comedic timing perfectly. When they worked together, magic happened on screen. Wilder could take Brooks' wild ideas and bring them to life in ways that were even funnier than Brooks had imagined. So what went wrong between these two comedy legends? It all started after Young Frankenstein became a massive hit. Gene Wilder had written most of the script for that movie, and he was feeling confident about his writing abilities. He came to Brooks with an idea for a new project called The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother. But this time, Wilder didn't just want to write and star in the movie. He wanted to direct it too. Brooks looked at his friend and creative partner, and he had to make one of the hardest decisions of his career. He told Wilder no. He didn't think Wilder was ready to direct. Directing is completely different from writing or acting. It requires a different set of skills, and Brooks felt that Wilder needed more experience before taking on that responsibility. But Wilder saw Brooks' rejection as the ultimate betrayal. Here was his closest collaborator, the person who understood his comedy better than anyone else, telling him he wasn't good enough to direct. Wilder felt hurt and angry. He decided to make the movie anyway, without Brooks' involvement. The movie came out, and while it had some funny moments, it lacked the special magic that happened when Brooks and Wilder worked together. The timing wasn't quite right. The jokes didn't land with the same impact. Something was missing, and that something was the incredible creative partnership between Brooks and Wilder. After that, the two men didn't speak for years. They had gone from being best friends and creative partners to complete strangers. It was like watching a marriage fall apart in slow motion. Eventually, they did reconcile and became friends again, but they never worked together on another movie. The creative trust had been broken, and once that happens, it's almost impossible to get it back. Brooks later said that losing Gene Wilder as a creative partner was one of the most painful experiences of his career. Not because Wilder was a bad person, but because their partnership had created something truly special, and now it was gone forever. Now let's talk about an actor who never actually worked with Mel Brooks, but for a very specific and telling reason. Chevy Chase was one of the biggest comedy stars of the 1970s and 80s. He was the breakout star of Saturday Night Live, and he went on to make hit movies like Caddyshack, Vacation, and Fletch. By all accounts, he should have been perfect for a Mel Brooks movie. He was funny, he was popular, and he had the kind of comedic timing that Brooks usually loved. So why did these two comedy legends never work together? According to Brooks, it all came down to personality. Brooks watched Chase's career from a distance, and he saw something that made him uncomfortable. Chase seemed to think he was always the smartest person in the room. He had a reputation for being difficult to work with and for thinking his ideas were better than everyone else's. Brooks valued something very specific in his actors. He called it generosity. The best comedy actors, in Brooks' opinion, were the ones who were willing to make themselves look foolish for the sake of getting a laugh. They weren't worried about looking cool or protecting their image. They just wanted to serve the comedy and make the whole project better. But Chase seemed to be the opposite. He always wanted to be the star, the center of attention, the guy with the best lines. Brooks felt that Chase would try to dominate every scene instead of working as part of an ensemble cast. The closest Chase ever came to working with Brooks was during the casting for Spaceballs. The studio suggested Chase for the role of Dark Helmet, the main villain in the movie. It could have been perfect. Chase had the comedic skills to pull off the role, and it would have been a great opportunity for both men. But Brooks said no. Instead, he cast Rick Moranis in the role, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions he ever made. Moranis understood exactly what Brooks wanted. He wasn't trying to steal scenes or make himself look good. He just wanted to serve the comedy and make the movie as funny as possible. Brooks later explained his decision by saying that Chase crashed comedy instead of dancing with it. Good comedy, according to Brooks, requires a delicate touch. You have to know when to push forward and when to step back. You have to work with your scene partners, not against them. And based on what Brooks observed from Chase's other work, he didn't think Chase had that kind of collaborative spirit. It's worth noting that Chase has had well-documented conflicts with other directors and co-stars throughout his career, which seemed to confirm Brooks' instincts about his personality and work style. Our fourth actor is someone who actually worked with Brooks multiple times, which makes this story even more complicated. Harvey Korman was a sketch comedy legend. He spent years on the Carol Burnett Show, where he proved he could handle any kind of comedic role you threw at him. He was incredibly talented, incredibly versatile, and incredibly funny. So when Mel Brooks started casting his movies, Korman seemed like a natural choice. And at first, everything worked perfectly. Korman appeared in several Brooks movies, including Blazing Saddles, High Anxiety, and History of the World Part 1. He delivered memorable performances and got huge laughs from audiences. On paper, it looked like the perfect creative partnership. But behind the scenes, there was trouble brewing. You see, Harvey Korman was used to working on the Carol Burnett Show, where actors had a lot of freedom to improvise and change things up on the spot. If Korman had an idea for how to make a scene funnier, he could try it out and see if it worked. The atmosphere was loose and collaborative. But Mel Brooks ran his movie sets very differently. Brooks liked to have complete control over every aspect of his films. He had very specific ideas about how each scene should play out, and he expected his actors to stick to the script and follow his direction. There wasn't a lot of room for improvisation or creative input from the actors. This difference in working styles led to constant tension between Brooks and Korman. Korman would suggest changes to scenes or want to try different approaches to his characters. Brooks would insist that they stick to his original vision. Both men were incredibly talented, but they had completely different ideas about how comedy should work. The breaking point came during the filming of High Anxiety. Korman was playing a character called Dr. Monteague, and he had lots of ideas about how to make the character funnier and more interesting. But Brooks wasn't interested in Korman's suggestions. He wanted Korman to play the role exactly as it was written in the script. This led to some uncomfortable moments on set. Korman would get frustrated when his ideas were rejected. Brooks would get frustrated when Korman kept pushing for changes. The atmosphere became tense and unpleasant, which was the opposite of what Brooks wanted on his movie sets. After High Anxiety was finished, something interesting happened. Harvey Korman's name stopped appearing in Mel Brooks movies. There was no public fight or dramatic falling out. Korman just quietly disappeared from Brooks' projects. Brooks later explained that it wasn't because he hated Korman or thought he was untalented. It was because working with Korman had become exhausting. Brooks wanted his movie sets to be fun and joyful places where everyone was working toward the same goal. But the constant creative conflicts with Korman were sucking the joy out of the filmmaking process. Sometimes, even when two people are incredibly talented, their working styles just don't match up. And in those cases, it's better for everyone if they go their separate ways. Our fifth actor is someone who Brooks never worked with, but their brief interaction tells us everything we need to know about what Brooks valued in his collaborators. Jerry Lewis was one of the biggest comedy stars in Hollywood history. Along with Dean Martin, he formed one of the most successful comedy duos of all time. On his own, he made hit movies like The Nutty Professor and The King of Comedy. He was incredibly talented, incredibly successful, and incredibly influential in the world of comedy. So you might think that Jerry Lewis and Mel Brooks would have been natural collaborators. They were both comedy legends working in Hollywood at the same time. They both had strong opinions about what made comedy work. They both had dedicated fan bases who loved their unique styles of humor. But they never worked together, and there's a very specific reason why. Brooks felt that Jerry Lewis was too much of an egomaniac to work with effectively. Lewis had a reputation for wanting complete control over every project he was involved in. He would rewrite scripts, direct scenes even when he wasn't the official director, and generally dominate every aspect of the filmmaking process. The one time these two comedy legends almost worked together was during the casting for Life Stinks. The movie studio suggested Jerry Lewis for a supporting role in the film. It could have been a great opportunity for both men to work together and create something special. But Brooks immediately rejected the idea. He told the studio executives that he didn't want to work with someone who thought he was funnier than the movie itself. Brooks believed that every actor in a film should serve the overall story and comedic vision, not try to steal the spotlight for themselves. To understand Brooks' feelings about Lewis, you have to understand what Brooks valued most in his collaborators. He wanted actors who were generous, who were willing to make themselves look foolish for the sake of getting a laugh, and who understood that comedy works best when everyone is working together toward the same goal. Jerry Lewis, in Brooks' opinion, was the opposite of all those things. Lewis seemed to think that every project should revolve around him and his comedic genius. He wasn't interested in serving someone else's vision or working as part of an ensemble cast. Brooks later described a dinner meeting between the two men that convinced him he had made the right decision. Lewis spent the entire evening talking about himself and his career, barely acknowledging Brooks or showing any interest in collaboration. It became clear to Brooks that Lewis wanted applause and admiration, not creative partnership. The story of Brooks and Lewis shows us something important about what it takes to work successfully in comedy. Raw talent isn't enough. You also need humility, generosity, and the ability to work well with others. Without those qualities, even the most gifted performers can become impossible to work with. Now, you might be wondering why I said 6 actors in the title when I've only talked about 5 so far. Well, that's because there's one more story that's even more shocking than the others. The 6th actor Brooks couldn't stand working with was someone who appeared in several of his movies and seemed to have a good relationship with him publicly. But behind the scenes, there were serious problems that Brooks kept hidden for decades. This actor had a reputation for being professional and easy to work with. Critics praised their performances in Brooks' films, and audiences loved their comedic timing. Everything seemed perfect from the outside. But Brooks later revealed that this actor had a habit of trying to rewrite scenes without permission, showing up late to set, and generally making the filmmaking process more difficult than it needed to be. The actors seemed to think they knew better than Brooks how to make the movies funnier. What made this situation even more frustrating for Brooks was that the actor was genuinely talented. Their performances were good, and they did help make the movies successful. But their behind-the-scenes behavior was so difficult to deal with that Brooks eventually decided it wasn't worth the hassle. The breaking point came when this actor started giving interviews where they took credit for ideas that had actually come from Brooks or other members of the creative team. Brooks felt betrayed by this behavior, especially since he had given the actors several great opportunities to showcase their comedic skills. After their last project together, Brooks quietly made sure this actor was never cast in any of his future films. There was no public confrontation or dramatic falling out. Brooks simply stopped working with them, and most people in Hollywood never knew there had been any problems. This story shows us something important about Mel Brooks as a filmmaker and as a person. He valued loyalty and honesty just as much as talent and comedic timing. Actors who tried to take advantage of his generosity or claim credit for his creative work quickly found themselves on the outside looking in. Looking back at all these stories, we can see a clear pattern in the types of actors Mel Brooks couldn't stand working with. They all had one thing in common. They put their own egos and personal interests above the success of the movie and the happiness of everyone else involved in the project. Brooks spent his entire career trying to create an atmosphere on his movie sets where everyone felt valued and everyone was working toward the same goal of making people laugh. Actors who disrupted that atmosphere, whether through arrogance, creative conflicts, or unprofessional behavior, quickly found themselves removed from Brooks' inner circle. But here's what makes these stories so fascinating. In every case, Brooks wasn't questioning these actors' talent or their right to have successful careers. He was simply recognizing that their working styles and personalities weren't compatible with his own approach to making movies. Frank Langella went on to have a distinguished career in serious films and theater. Gene Wilder continued making movies and found success as a director in his own right. Chevy Chase became one of the biggest comedy stars of his generation. Harvey Korman continued getting laughs on television and in other films. Jerry Lewis remained a beloved figure in comedy until his death. The fact that Brooks couldn't work with these actors doesn't mean they were bad people or untalented performers. It just means that creative partnerships are complicated, and sometimes even the most talented people can't find a way to work together effectively. What's really impressive about Mel Brooks is how he handled these difficult situations. In most cases, he didn't publicly criticize the actors or try to damage their careers. He simply moved on and found other collaborators who were better suited to his working style. This approach allowed Brooks to maintain his reputation as a professional and classy filmmaker while also protecting the creative atmosphere he needed to make his movies. It's a lesson that applies not just to Hollywood, but to any workplace where creative collaboration is important. Brooks' ability to recognize when a creative partnership isn't working and make changes without creating unnecessary drama is part of what made him such a successful director. He understood that making great comedy requires getting the right mix of people working together in harmony. The actors who did work well with Brooks, like Gene Hackman, Cleavon Little, Madeline Kahn, and Cloris Leachman, became part of his extended comedy family. They appeared in multiple Brooks films and helped create some of the funniest moments in movie history. These successful partnerships show us what Brooks was looking for in his actors. He wanted performers who were generous with their fellow cast members, who trusted his creative vision, and who were willing to look silly for the sake of getting a laugh. When he found actors with these qualities, he worked with them again and again. As Mel Brooks enters the final chapters of his incredible career, these stories about the actors he couldn't work with give us insight into what made him such a successful filmmaker. His standards were high, his expectations were clear, and he wasn't willing to compromise the quality of his work or the happiness of his sets just to work with big-name stars. In an industry where ego and celebrity often take priority over creativity and collaboration, Brooks maintained his commitment to making movies the right way. Even when it meant missing out on working with some very talented actors, he stuck to his principles and created an environment where great comedy could flourish. These stories also remind us that success in any creative field requires more than just talent. It requires the ability to work well with others, to put the project above personal interests, and to maintain professional relationships even when things get difficult. Mel Brooks may be 98 years old, but his insights into what makes creative collaboration work are as relevant today as they were 50 years ago. In a world where social media and celebrity culture often reward ego and self-promotion, Brooks' emphasis on generosity, humility, and teamwork feels more important than ever. The next time you watch a Mel Brooks movie, pay attention not just to how funny it is, but to how well all the actors work together. Notice how everyone seems to be having fun and supporting each other's performances. That doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of careful casting and a director who understood that great comedy comes from people working together, not competing against each other. And if you're someone who works in a creative field yourself, whether it's filmmaking, writing, music, or anything else, these stories offer valuable lessons about how to build successful creative partnerships. Talent is important, but it's not enough. You also need to be someone that other people actually want to work with. So there you have it. The 6 actors that comedy legend Mel Brooks couldn't stand working with, and the important lessons we can learn from these complicated creative relationships. Each story shows us something different about what it takes to succeed in the entertainment industry and in any collaborative creative work. If you enjoyed learning about these behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories, make sure to hit that like button to show your support. These kinds of insider stories about legendary filmmakers like Mel Brooks are incredibly rare and valuable for understanding how great movies actually get made. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love classic comedy movies or behind-the-scenes Hollywood gossip. Stories like these help us appreciate not just the final movies we see on screen, but all the hard work and difficult decisions that go into creating them. And definitely subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos about classic Hollywood, legendary filmmakers, and the untold stories behind your favorite movies. We're always working to bring you the most interesting and entertaining content about the golden age of cinema and the incredible people who made it possible. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we'll dive deep into more fascinating stories from Hollywood's past that you've never heard before.